wave of murder which is sweeping the eastern third of the nation is being committed by creatures who feast upon the flesh of their victims. First eyewitness accounts of this came from people who were understandably frightened and almost incoherent. Officials and newsmen at first discounted those eyewitness descriptions as being beyond belief. However, reports persisted. Medical examinations of some of the victims bore out the fact that they had been partially devoured. This is the latest disclosure in a report from National Civil Defense Headquarters in Washington. It has been established that persons who have recently died have been returning to life and committing acts of murder. A widespread investigation of reports from funeral homes, morgues, and hospitals has concluded that the unburied dead are coming back to life and seeking human victims. It's hard for us here to believe what we're reporting to you, but it does seem to be a fact. When this emergency first began, radio and television was advising people to stay inside, behind locked doors for safety. Well, that situation has now changed. We're able to report a definite course of action for you. Civil defense machinery has been organized to provide rescue stations with food, shelter, medical treatment, and protection by armed National Guardsmen. Stay tuned to the broadcasting stations in your local area for this list of rescue stations. This list will be repeated throughout our news coverage. Look for the name of the rescue station nearest you. the obvious threat to untold numbers of citizens, and because of the crisis which is even now developing, this radio station will remain on the air day and night. This station and hundreds of other radio and TV stations throughout this part of the country are pooling their resources through an emergency network hookup to keep you informed of all developments. At this hour, we repeat, these are the facts as we know them. There is an epidemic of mass murder being committed by a virtual army of unidentified assassins. The murders are taking place in villages, cities, rural homes, and suburbs with no apparent pattern or reason for the slayings. It seems to be a sudden, general explosion of mass homicide. We have some descriptions of the assassins. Eyewitnesses say they are ordinary-looking people. Some say they appear to be in a kind of trance. Others describe them as being... So, at this point, there is no really authentic way for us to say who or what to look for and guard yourself against. Misshapen monsters. Reaction of law enforcement officials is one of complete bewilderment at this hour. So far, we have been unable to determine that any kind of organized investigation is yet underway. Police, sheriff deputies, and emergency ambulances are literally deluged with calls for help. The scene can best be described as mayhem. Mayors of Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, and Miami, along with the governors of several eastern and midwestern states, have indicated the National Guard may be mobilized at any moment, but that has not happened as yet. The only advice our reporters have been able to get from official sources is for private citizens to stay in their homes behind locked doors. Do not venture outside for any reason until the nature of this crisis has been determined and until we can advise what course of action to take. Keep listening to radio and TV for any special instructions as this crisis develops further. Thousands of office and factory workers are being urged to stay at their places of employment, not to make any attempt to get to their homes. However, in spite of this urging and warning, streets and highways, gentlemen who just received word that the President has called a meeting of his cabinet to deal with any sudden epidemic of murder which is seeing the East concern action this time. This meeting is scheduled to convene within the hour. Members of the presidential cabinet will be joined by officials of the FBI and behind closed doors. The White House spokesman, in announcing this conference, says there will be an official announcement as soon as possible following that meeting. This is the latest dispatch just received in our newsroom. Latest word also from National Press Services in Washington, D.C. now tells us that the emergency presidential conference, which we've just mentioned, will include high-ranking scientists from the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. That's the extent of this latest meeting. Members of this cabinet, the FBI, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and scientists from NASA within the hour. All radio and TV stations throughout this part of the country, including the one to which you were listening, have joined their facilities in an emergency network to bring you this news as it develops. We urge you to stay tuned to radio and TV and to stay indoors at all costs. Late reports reaching this newsroom tell of frightened people seeking refuge in churches, schools, and government buildings, demanding shelter and protection from the wholesale murder which apparently is engulfing much of the nation. Law enforcement officials are at a loss to explain or, even at this hour, even to theorize about the reasons for this wave of murder. So far, the advice they're able to give the public is Chief T.K. Dunmore of Camden, North Carolina, was quoted as saying, quote, "Tell the people, for God's sake, to get off the streets. Tell them to go home and lock their doors and windows up tight. We don't know what kind of murder-happy characters we have here." End quote. This Chief Dunmore of Camden, North Carolina. So far, the only descriptions, the only clues anyone has of the killers come from frightened witnesses of some of the slaves. These eyewitness accounts variously describe the murderers as ordinary-looking people, misshapen monsters, people who look like they're in a trance, and things that look like people but act like animals. Some eyewitnesses tell of seeing victims who look as though they had been torn apart. This whole ghastly story began developing 2 days ago with the report of the slaying of a family of 7 in their rural home near Gulfport, Virginia. Since then, reports of some senseless killings began snowballing in a reign of terror which has hopscotched in an erratic, disconnected manner throughout much of the eastern and midwestern United States. Efforts to keep track of the murder reports by the placing of markers on a map seem to indicate a general spreading of the extreme southeastern United States to north and west. Our newsmen have been on the telephone talking with officials in other cities and have determined that none of this kind of mass murder has Similar killings have been reported around the Houston and Galveston areas, but nothing goes on in the absence of any some critical balance of killers. We repeat, this radio station. Civil defense officials in Cumberland have told newsmen that murder victims show evidence of having been partially devoured by their murderers. Consistent reports from witnesses to the effect that people who acted as though they were in a kind of trance were killing and eating their victims prompted authorities to examine the bodies of some of the victims. Medical authorities in Cumberland have concluded that in all cases, the killers are eating the flesh of the people they murdered. Repeating this latest bulletin just received moments ago from Cumberland, Maryland, civil defense authorities have told newsmen that murder victims show evidence of having been partially devoured by their murderers. Medical examination of victims' bodies shows conclusively that the killers are eating the flesh of the people they kill. And so this incredible story becomes more ghastly with each report. It's difficult to imagine such a thing actually happening, but these are the reports we have been receiving and passing on to you. Reports which have been verified as completely as is possible in this confused situation. It is happening, and it would appear that no one is safe from this wave of mass murder. Reports of murder victims being partially eaten by their slayers is true. No further details available at this time. Conference of the Presidential Cabinet, the FBI, Joint Chiefs of Staff, the CIA, has not produced any public information. Why are space experts being consulted about an Earthbound emergency? So far, all the betting on the answer to that question centers on the recent Explorer satellite shot to Venus. That satellite, you recall, started back to Earth, but never got here. That's the space vehicle which orbited Venus and then was purposely destroyed by NASA when scientists discovered it was carrying a mysterious high-level radiation. Venus probe is Yes, that was the subject of the meeting.
You feel there is a connection between this and the phenomenon?
There's a definite connection.
Doctor, please.